Good morning, everyone. My name is Rashmi Vamula, and I'm the Director of Operations for Digital Page. So we're wrapping up the hackathon sessions with a fantastic roundtable discussion about the future of data management. So a few of you were in the hands-on workshop with Timbr.ai just before this discussion, so we're here to continue that conversation. So Timbr.ai is one of our technology partners for this hackathon. But I'd like to introduce our speakers before we get started. So Amit Weitzner, he is the co-founder of Timbr.ai, and again, one of our technology partners for the hackathon. Alok Benjwal, he is the Vice President, Data and Analytics Solutions Leader within BCM Insights and Data at Capgemini. And finally, Shankar Ramanathan, he's the Global Head of AI/ML Solutions for Banking and Capital Markets, Capgemini. So some general housekeeping before we get started. If you have a question, please use the chat function within YouTube, and our chat moderators will make sure to get to your questions throughout the session or during the audience Q&A at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it off to our speakers. Welcome, everyone. Shankar, off to you.
Hello, happy Sunday morning to everyone. Welcome to the roundtable. So, hi Alok and hi Amit.
Hey Shankar, how are you?
Very good, very good. I'll just kick it off with probably the first set of things which we had in mind in terms of a discussion topic. So then, of course, Amit, Alok, you can add more to it. And Amit, we would like to have you elaborate on those.
Sure.
The first one would be if you could kind of give us an overview of Timbr.ai, the history, how the whole thing came about, what it started off as, what it's evolving to be, and where is it kind of going. So just a brief introduction to Timbr.ai.
Sure. I hope it won't be too long because we're on for a lot of time. So I founded Timbr.ai in 2018 together with two of my co-founders, Dan and Jonathan. And when we founded Timbr.ai, we wanted to look at the challenge of how organizations are adopting knowledge graphs. Now, knowledge graph is not considered a new technology if you look at the data modeling and data management aspect. It exists for at least 20 years when the semantic web came, the idea of the semantic web came to life. And we saw that, how does an enterprise, that already developed an existing database or existing data model, how can he move and get the benefits that the semantic web has actually given us as an idea to how people should model and work with data. So let me give a little bit about the background. So in Timbr.ai, we looked at the most commonly used technology. You can say relational modeling, relational databases are here, for 40 years are the most common one that organizations use today. And we wanted to merge that with knowledge graph. Instead of taking the innovative approach, trying to replace the old with the new, which a lot of vendors, a lot of great ideas came to life by trying to replace the old relational databases, the old relational modeling, but eventually failed. I think one good example would be the Hadoop ecosystem, where a lot of new open source tools tried to create a lot of APIs and query languages, but all of them were, the industry requested SQL as a query interface, and most of them today have some kind of an SQL interface. And the same applies for knowledge graphs. We wanted to democratize this technology, and we were able to do this by merging a relational, the SQL idea of querying the data with the knowledge graph capabilities, which is different from almost all the other solutions that exist today that say, let's replace the existing database, let's use a new query language, let's try to educate the market, or let's move them to the new way of data management. And this is where the idea of Timbr.ai came to life. We spent almost 2 years in R&D. Before we went out to the market, we want to make sure that we don't invent some new query language. So one of the things we invested a lot in Timbr is that actually the SQL, when you query the knowledge graph, is actually standard SQL. So for us to be adhered to the standards, Timbr is fully compliant with the semantic web. So all the existing ontologies, all the existing work that has been done in the last 20 years you can still reuse in our platform. So we were not trying to change or break anything. We tried to bring the best of the most commonly used technology, relational databases, and the most innovative one, which are knowledge graph, in a single platform. And this is how we started Timbr.ai.
That's excellent. So that kind of touches upon some of the interesting things in terms of what's the unique value proposition, how you stand out from your competitors, but also gives us a good window into your thought process of how to have a sense of continuity of existing technologies, what people are used to, and kind of using those network externalities to actually kind of give a sense of continuity and also introduce something new and revolutionary. I mean, that's something which is a very unique insight I kind of would draw from what you mentioned. Um, we would also like to hear something about, like, how does this all kind of merge with the rise of data fabric, data mesh, and the recent architectural buzzwords we hear about all the time in terms of companies having spent so much on so many data marts. They have acquired banks over time. They have so many multiple data systems, and they are trying to bring all of them together. So, how does Timbr.ai actually play into that space?
So that's a very interesting question, because in the last couple of years, we actually saw change in the market, in the knowledge graph market. I think it was mainly driven by Gartner and other analysts who looked at the whole knowledge graph market and said, look, knowledge graph can help other initiatives like data management and data fabric. This can be one of the core components of building a data fabric. And it's also made a shift in our company. When we started Timbr.ai, which we thought about knowledge graph as a database, as a virtual knowledge graph. This is essentially our product, that you can apply on top of your database. But as we move forward and saw that the market is shifting towards tools that they need help in data management, they need help in a way to integrate data faster and easier way, we also went and added more capabilities of data management. So we can look at our journey starting from building a virtual database to building a full a data fabric platform, right? That enables organizations to connect multiple data sources and giving a single, a unified layer where all data consumers can now say, I don't need to understand where the data is, in which database. If I want a customer data, I simply have a business definition of a customer and I can work with that. I don't care if it's one table or two databases. The user doesn't care in which database actually, or how it's stored on the underlying technology. He just wants to get access to the data fast and in an intuitive way.
If you could also just elaborate on what kind of skill set does a user need to use Timbr.ai? You talked about adoption, having continuity from SQL, but at the same time, you talked about various databases being pulled and you giving a single window into all of that. Now, the next question is how easy it is, because you have such a complicated data mesh behind it. How is it that Timbr.ai enables users to easily perform all these activities of giving a business window to the underlying complexity of all these multiple tables from multiple systems?
So I think that to answer your question is also one of the things that we looked at. What are the challenges that exist today before we founded Timbr.ai? One of the challenges we found out is the complexity of the technology. Only very persons with specific skill set, very sophisticated people knew how to create and work with knowledge graph. We wanted to democratize that. And we saw a lot of complaints on the tools, on how you visualize, how it's easy to interact with knowledge graphs. And we also focused on that as well. So there's two things that we've done in Timbr.ai. Where first is, if you know SQL, you already know how to work with Timbr. You don't need to learn anything new. If you know to create table statement, if you know how to query your databases in SQL, you can work with Timbr without learning anything new. So that drops the barriers for everyone who wants to try the technology. He doesn't need to spend 1 month, 2 months learning the specification, learning a new query language, doing some kind of training. He can simply start very simple, very easy, explore the technology and work with that. On the second level, we also implemented a very easy to use user interface. Some of the things about knowledge graph is reducing the complexity of the data. And by leveraging the correct visualizations, you're able to express very complex relationships in a simple way that any human can understand, not only people who know SQL. So our platform also provides a visual business view of the data, whether it's looking at business metadata, what in my organization, what type of business objects or concepts I can ask questions about. That's one a business question to understand the metadata. The other one is actually exploring the data. Let's say I'm interested in customer X, and I want to see what relationships to other data I have from that customer. You can easily explore that intuitively in a graph representation. And we bring those unification of SQL. If you know SQL, you can use our platform, or you also have the visual interface, which is very intuitive to use.
Excellent. I mean, that's something which is really nice to hear, that you have usability at the very forefront of your requirements and your unique value proposition of your tool. That's something really nice to hear. So, given that we work on a AI and ML center of excellence here at Capgemini, one of the major problems we see with a lot of these customers are they have a lot of machine learning models that are being run. And so if I were to read into this and kind of project my own understanding of this, I could visualize the relationship at the data level, not just at a field level. I can visualize it using graph database, the way you have it. And then on top of it, use the semantic SQL to actually bring together data and, if needed, calculate some features. And these features can be used in machine learning models. Am I oversimplifying this, or you think that's something that's actually a possibility that clients should be looking forward to?
So I think that you're touching the right point, that when you look at data scientists and customers that want to run machine learning models, they want to focus on optimizing what is the right model, how can I optimize and how can I get the prediction to the customer. Not about, wait, I need to write now 7 joins from 7 different tables. How do I express that join? Where is the data? If I sometimes, we hear data scientists, you get the credentials to a database, go play around with that. How much time it takes for a person to explore, 100 table database, 1,000 table database. It becomes a challenge for him to now, before even looking at the machine learning model, how do I join the data? How do I make the right filtering? A lot of the things we see that is related to the relational data model is that you do some kind of an optimization on the database level, for you to have very fast performance. But it makes the hard for the user to actually write the query. So a lot of times the people who model the data on the relational side, they don't care about how easy it is to query, but how fast you can get the responses. And I think that any abstraction layer, and Timbr is simply an abstraction layer on top of the databases, gives you a way to simply interact with the data. Now, what is unique about knowledge graph as an abstraction layer, a view on the database is also kind of an abstraction. But the real power of knowledge graph is the relationships. So when you're actually talking about semantic SQL, it's actually standard SQL in Timbr, but with graph traversals. So a user doesn't need to write any more joins. A user doesn't need to understand how to connect or how to filter the data. The data is clean, is validated. You can easily get all the different features from all the different tables in a single query, instead of writing 100 lines of SQL query, joining all those tables and filtering and cleaning it. So that's the whole process becomes very simple and intuitive for a data scientist who can now focus on the machine learning model, and not about, wait, now that I have access to, two different databases, how do I combine them? Which can affect the whole process. Now we need to stitch the data together instead of focusing on getting value from the data. And this is where we help those processes as well.
That's something which is very heartening for all the hackathon candidates and people who are basically assembled here on a Sunday morning, of course, trying to learn as much as we all can. And it's a very, very heartening to know about how it makes life of a data scientist easy. I think majority of the people assembled here would like to actually hear that. So let's kind of move gears and kind of move into the second part of our discussion. Maybe Alok can drive this more from a use cases implementation for financial services industry. Alok, over to you. Any?
Yeah, so as I was listening to what Amit was saying, uh, one perspective, two perspectives I would like to add here uh, on the business side of the problem as well as the customer side of the problem. And I like to take the example of a restaurant business here, which is what probably a solution like Timber is solving for. If you look at a business, uh, what they have what has happened in the last decade or so is businesses are inundated with a wealth of information, so they are drowning in the data that is available to them about customers. And earlier it was easy to solve that problem through relational databases. You could handle probably 25 to 30 or even 50 tables about different attributes of customers and what they are doing in terms of transaction or their lifestyle or whatever. But imagine you are running a restaurant and you are in the kitchen, and traditionally you had like 25 to 30 ingredients. But now, the world of data that we live in, you have like millions of uh, ingredients that you have to cook your recipes on. Imagine you have 500 types of tomatoes and thousands of types of mushrooms and similarly pasta and whatever. And just imagine the chef's job who's cooking those recipes and has to pick from that. That itself becomes very, very challenging, which is really the data scientist in this case, as we uh, compare it to this discussion. So I think that layer of abstraction that Amit was talking about, and the curated layer or the semantic layer becomes very important, so that the data scientist or the chef in my example uh, has something easier that they can navigate to the right attributes that they need to pick in building their recipe. So that's one perspective for businesses. That complexity has grown over the last few years. On the customer side, let's say now you are on that table, and the customer is looking at the menu, and instead of your traditional 20 to 25 items on the menu, the customer is being handed thousands of menu options to pick from. So that also is a huge experience challenge that needs to be solved from on the other side of the spectrum. And I think when it comes to personalization and giving the right menu to the right customer at the right time, I think technology like this also solves for that, and that also is an unmet need, uh, which I think not just Timber, but also companies like Capgemini are helping companies solve for.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to hear more about how Timber AI is used today, what kind of use cases are you seeing in the industry? So first, let's kind of look at banking and capital markets, because both me and Alok come from that. And then probably we can expand it to insurance and maybe outside. So whatever order you would like to handle it, Amit, but typically we are trying to understand what problems are we solving for using Timber AI? What is it being kind of famous for today? What is selling? and where is this kind of headed from a use cases perspective? If you can share your perspective on that.
Sure. So I think one of the main use cases we see, in the financial sector, but in all the different sectors, is actually trying to harmonize and integrating the data. We hear a lot of the customer 360 view. So you can apply that customer 360 to a fund 360. And essentially that becomes a way for an organization to say, now I want to build an holistic view. That holistic can be on any type of business entity, can be on investment data, can be on transactions, can be on customer, or can be of even on, if we go more to the extreme use cases like anti-money laundering or know your customer. Those are the same challenges. How can I build an holistic view of data so I can easily integrate the data, find the insights I'm looking for, and not spend months doing that manually every time I have a new project or a new business question? So I think we're starting to look at the strategic data use cases, and there's a lot of discussion on how should now people should look at data modeling differently. Data modeling becomes a crucial part of the whole data-driven organization. If you have a good data modeling team, and also if you build the right governance for that, you can accelerate a lot of the projects, reduce the costs of the integration. And I can give some example. The traditional way, if I have multiple data coming from multiple sources or stored in multiple databases that are all related to a customer, would to create a data warehouse or a data mart, when I ETL copy all the data into a single location to do the analytics. But what if I can allow you to simply connect to the existing databases, not copy the data, but and run live queries so you can explore, understand, and actually integrate the data live on every query you're running. And once you get to a point where you have a clear view of how you can integrate all of those sources, now you can choose whether you want to copy that to a single physical location or not. That becomes a performance challenge, not a data modeling and a data engineering challenge when you start a project. So a lot of times you can reduce the number of data pipelines you build in order to build this customer 360 view or fund 360 view on top of your data. And that would essentially give the users fast access to the data. They don't need to wait 3 months, 6 months for you to build that single data warehouse or data mart and do the join. They can have access to it in a matter of days. That makes the whole organization moves at a faster pace. If I deliver to my data consumer faster, they would deliver to the business user faster, which then will bring us to a new set of business questions we didn't had time to think before that. So this is how you can build a culture when you try to find the bottlenecks, when you're looking at data integration challenges, and strategically attack them. Now you have the right tools and mechanisms to do that.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And what I have seen companies evolve into, especially in the financial services, is there has been a lot of functional silo within a product line, or in case of banks where you have multiple product lines like credit cards or loans, or checking account and savings and investments. These companies have operated in a very product silo, and uh, and then on top of it, within the product there is a functional silos, and they've created their own data marts. Like marketing has their own, and risk has their own data models, and operations have their own. And when you try to roll it up and try to do something at a customer centric level, that customer 360 becomes very, very challenging, and it has been very uh, undervalued in the past. But now that companies are trying to break that functional as well as cross product silo, the need of having to do that customer 360 is becoming very important. And then again, not only doing that customer 360 taking months, but being able to do that in near real time is also becoming very important to drive some of the personalization use cases, which need to happen in the moment when a customer is browsing the web or calling into the call center. You need to know if they had a fraudulent transaction, or if they had a bad customer experience when they were at the branch, or when they were trying to move money on the mobile app. So that knowledge, that 360 knowledge, and that 360 knowledge in real time or near real time, is really becoming important. Also because the customers have become more aware, they have become more demanding, because they deal with a lot of information and experiences with some of these digital native applications like Amazon or Uber, where they have the ability to not only get the service or the product, but know everything and anything about what's happening while the product or the service is being delivered to them, right? So they have so much control over the whole relationship that they expect similar experiences and personalization when they deal with other product companies like financial services.
So, Amit, touching on that, is there any specific use case that has really given you a lot of sleepless nights, or like has excited you the most as a problem solver?
Definitely the AML one, the anti-money laundering. I think knowledge graphs and graph technologies in general have been the, I think, choice of the organizations to solve those kind of use cases because of the complex relationships, and to be able to infer relationships that are not direct. And this is where we see, the value that you cannot get from the relational technology, right? This is like you can answer specific question, most of the questions on a relational database. But when you want to do something that is a bit more advanced, then you see you're limited by the query language. And part of the things that we've done in Timbr is actually taking, for example, graph algorithms, which are essentially a way for us to explore relationships in an algorithmic way, either to create new relationships or to cluster a data in a specific, like community detection, build different communities. This is very common in AML use cases based on a specific attributes that you want to explore. We made this available to any SQL user. Previously, it was you need to have a basic knowledge of graph theory and understand how the graph algorithm actually work in the backend in order to do that by yourself. But imagine now, if you can do it in SQL, any analyst can now come and say, I want to do community detection on my customer data and build communities of customers or community of products. That becomes a simple SQL query that anyone can now run and leverage on top of his data. And another thing that we've seen, which is for me is extremely valuable, is the use of external data sets. If we look at what banks and financial services look when they do AML, is how can we enrich our internal data to gain more insights in order to find the right, I don't know if it's fraud ring or if it's a specific suspicious transactions between people. All of that can be extended using external data sets. And they've been wanting for years to find a simple way to integrate it without, downloading the data, manually copying it to the databases. Now they need to explore. They wanted to find a fast, intuitive way to integrate more and more data, so the users can find more insights that weren't possible before.
So you're saying peer-to-peer payments, you can actually start identifying AML kind of fraud kind of rings and what might. So you're basically saying one area kind of lends itself into the next area. So like you're kind of seeing a lot of merging of domains is what you are kind of alluding to. Would that be an accurate statement?
Yes, I think that today we can find on the web, for example, ownership data, who owns which companies, and sometimes that identifies some suspicious, relationships in the data. You say, I want to explore why is this doesn't look like a standardized, company ownership type of structure. So now you can identify those from the algorithmic point of view, and then the person can now go and try to find if it's really, if it's really suspicious or not. And without the external data, you won't be able to identify those networks of relationships.
So we can bring in a combination of external data sources which are multiplying, as Alok was basically mentioning. It's exploding. The number of data sources is exploding, and that you can combine that with the internal database information. And given this wide variety of databases you're putting, this whole fabric, or like Timber, allows you to simplify the whole thing. Don't have to worry about the underlying complex joins. Gives you a simple way of looking at it and formulating these queries and calculating stuff and looking at things. So you kind of are like playing a very, very important pivotal role when all of this data is exploding and these complex data systems are coming in. Just like to Alok's uh, point, it's more around like allowing a million spices and million ingredients to go into like a million number of dishes. So that's something that's actually very, very interesting. And you guys have made me hungry on a Sunday morning, so I look forward to my lunch now.
Thank you. And
So
I think for
yeah.
that, just to add a comment to what you're saying, one of the things we see is how you can reuse the work that someone else did, right? So some of the things we've seen in the financial industry is industry standards like FIBO, the Financial Industry Business Ontology, where someone had already modeled some of the business concepts that we can reuse. We don't need to start from scratch trying to model our knowledge graph. And that's one of the key ideas about knowledge graph, is about knowledge sharing. If somebody already modeled something, if it's open source or even internally, if someone created a KPI, I can easily reuse that, and I don't need to go and manually define that again, which in most cases today happens ad hoc. And a good example would be a data scientist working on his Python notebook. Sometimes he creates some calculations or some features which are only internal to his own notebook. How can he share that, with the business user looking at the dashboard where he wants to see the same KPI or the same feature, but now someone else needs to go and calculate it on the dashboard level because the dashboard is not connected to the Python notebook where the original data scientist created that metric. But if you have a single location where all those metrics are being created and features, now organization can truly do knowledge sharing. And a lot of the duplicate work you see from different departments, different teams, sometimes even in the same team, can be reduced by leveraging a platform like Timbr.ai, which consolidates the data modeling into a single location to unify that into providing a single view of the data.
Thank you. And maybe we move on to the third part of the conversation, which largely I had in mind. Um, where do you see the industry going, like with these tools coming in, like knowledge graphs, semantic SQL, this explosion of data sources? So, what is, if we can touch on the current and expected future impact of these tools, where is the industry headed? Where do you think? I mean, this is more like a thought experiment. I'm not expecting you to, I'm not going to hold your feet to fire on this, but where is it that you think this is all headed towards? What are the future trends in terms of where do you think what's next for Timbr.ai's next big version? What is it that you are planning big in terms of adding to the existing functionality? What is it that kind of keeps you up on a Sunday morning?
So I'll answer first on the industry side, then I'll move to what we're planning forward. So we see on the industry, very interestingly, there's a big debate on data fabric or data mesh, maybe both, and we see that as an architectural decision. Some companies would rather go with the data mesh approach. Some others will prefer the data fabric approach. I think that what we see is the commonality of both. People starting to look at how we can build those internal processes and select the right tools to integrate harmonized data and enable knowledge sharing and data sharing inside the organization. In Timbr side, when we look at this, we say how we can do two things that are crucial today. What are the most pain points we see today in most organizations? The first one is actually creating the first knowledge graph. And creating the first knowledge graph in some domains, like the financial domain, you do have the industry model, so it's not a problem. You can just import. But in other domains where you don't have that industry model, the well-defined business concepts with the descriptions and relationships, then the organization has a couple of options. They need to either manually create that or generate that from their existing data assets. Could be metadata management tools, could be governance tools. And we want to focus in Timbr.ai on allowing a human that now is modeling a knowledge graph to get automatically a recommendation of a knowledge graph based on his own data, and he just needs to approve. If we already automatically identify relationships, for example. So a user in our platform can go and say, when I look at customer, what recommendation Timbr saw in the data that I can add to the customer business concept. But we want to take this one further by recommending a full knowledge graph, not only one relationship, right? Here are the business entities I found, here are the relationship. Do you approve or do you not approve that process? That's one aspect of the automation. That would facilitate the work because then you truly have a synergy between machine generated data models, which the quality may not be as high as you'd expect today. But when a human can curate that, you can achieve very good results together instead of him doing that manually. That's one aspect. The second aspect is about exposing data to business users. So we already do that for the metadata, where you can easily search and identify the business entities, but they still rely on the analyst or the data team to actually answer the business questions. And we've seen also a lot of trends in the natural language processing, where a user can query the data in natural language. So we're also looking at those areas where we can expose an interface for business users so he can easily query the knowledge graph using natural language. That would allow him not to have any knowledge dependent on, for example, on SQL. He doesn't need to know SQL, but he can still answer very complex questions. Now, if I go to one, what we focus on that, we see a lot of deep learning models, or black box, if you would call that sometimes when you run a query and you're not sure about the results, that would affect the user trust on the system. So what we're focusing on is creating that layer when, if you run a question, it's 100% what you meant in terms of the language. And that's one of the challenges that in general, knowledge graph are very good in handling. When you look at a knowledge graph and you have an ontology that describes your business domain, that allows you to build a better natural language interface for the user, because you don't need to understand the raw data. You can work on a highly curated metadata model, which has all the business definitions, and expose that to the user. So that takes the whole consumption of the data one step further, not only to technical users, but also to business users as well.
And that will democratize how to look at data marts, derive value from it, and make it much, much easier for people.
Exactly, because I think one of the things we see a lot of the challenge today is that organizations want fast ROI. If you tell them it takes 1 year to do that project, they might lose interest after 6 months. But if you say I can deliver that in 1 month or 2 months, that becomes very, very intriguing, because after 1 month, they can plan the next project and plan the next project. And we saw a lot of projects failing because they weren't able to deliver in time. So one of the things that we focus on our platform is how we can accelerate and make sure that those projects are shortened and on time as well.
I think extending Alok's conversation about a chef and thousands of ingredients and thousands of dishes, now the consumers have also become fast food consumers. They want it pretty much within a month. So that kind of jives with what you're saying. People want to see ROI immediately as well. So I mean, a lot of those kind of blending in with the chef metaphor Alok has brought in this morning.
Definitely. I think reducing the complexity is if I try to summarize what he said, it's about reducing the complexity for the chef and also for the customer ordering, and you can, if you can remove the complexity, you make their life easier. And if you make their life easier, they can do more. That's how we see it.
Yeah, and I think to your point about reusability of data, I think that's an important one too, where uh, data was not considered a shared asset, and more you are seeing within an enterprise across products and functions, data is becoming a shared asset, what you call revenue across departments. There is a standard definition for revenue, right? And those KPIs. I think what we will see over a period of time, with so much explosion of data, is there will be standardization across the industry as well. And I think there need to be solutions like Timber that help with that mandate. So I think that the standardization will become very important.
So, what I've been hearing is there's a lot of stress on continuity, right? Like you wanted to basically look at people using SQL in the past, going towards knowledge graph now. In the future, you want to have NLP based querying. So there seems to be this thought process of ensuring continuity, ensuring all this. So, where does this actually get into your design thought process? I'm just trying to understand your psyche of like how almost every element of what you talk about seems to have an element of continuity, seems to have like, okay, this is what's happening in the past. I want to have the whole change done in such a way that people do not resist it, move on with it, but also look at the future. So, how does this thing like come out in your design thinking? Is it something with Amit as a person has come up with, or is it something like as a company you have this as a design philosophy? I just wanted to just very curious about that part of it.
So I think some of them is based on our experience, working with large enterprises and identifying those. And actually, personally, I tried to implement knowledge graph technologies, and it was hard for me to politically try to convince everyone to learn how to use it. And that's just part of the process, to be able to identify what was hard in our experience, but also working very closely with our customers. We really like to hear what are the challenges they're looking now, what they're looking 1 year, try to identify how we can help. We were not going to solve all the problems for all our customers. We try to find the commonality that we hear and try to push forward the industry to solve those challenges. And a lot of it is essentially things that we've discussed, whether it's industry models, whether it's about allowing the user to automatically receive recommendations, whether it's about even simpler things like a lineage or version control. When a person changes something in production, he wants a very fast way to go back if he did some kind of a mistake. And by the way, that's not a very common thing today in most data projects, right? If I change something on the database, not sure I can see like 10 days ago that change was looked in a very simple, intuitive way. Of course, you can explore the logs, and if you're familiar with the underlying database, you can finally reach that, but that would be a very hard process to do. But if you can simply go back, version control, like you would do with your code. When I develop my software, very easy for me to look at different versions, roll back, merge, those type of I think thought processes, and also the culture that was initially started for software development now moving to data modeling as well. The customer wants the same capabilities that allow them to scale that allow them to ensure consistency in production and so on. So it's a combine. To answer your question, it's a combine of what we hear from our customers and our past experience from working with this type of technologies as well.
Thank you. Thanks for that good and nice explanation on how that has kind of influenced your design thought process. So, any questions from the users? Anybody in the data? Any of the hackers who have any question? We can kind of open the floor to them if anybody wants to. We have like another 15 minutes, so we would like to spend some time on any open questions. For the moderators, do you have any questions at this point of time which we would like to ask?
Hey, so there was a question earlier, but it looks like the Timbr team actually answered it, but we can talk about it right here. So the question was, what tool is Timbr.ai an alternative for? Are there any instances where knowledge graphs are not the best solution to use? You've obviously alluded to this throughout your conversation, but let's put up the answer that your Timbr team has answered with.
Can you repeat that question for Amit? I mean, I think I did not get the question completely.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question is, what tool is Timbr.ai an alternative for? And are there any instances where knowledge graphs are not the best solution to use? And the answer here from the Timbr team, and Amit, feel free to jump in. Timbr features the capabilities offered by knowledge graph solutions, semantic layer solutions, and data virtualization solutions. Timbr is part of the SQL ecosystem as opposed to other knowledge graph solutions.
So I think that's a very interesting question for the knowledge graph space, because you can easily divide, which use cases are usually for knowledge graphs or graph databases, and which use cases are for relational databases like data warehouse or data lake technologies, which we can very easily classify both. But the interesting part about Timbr is that we bring the best of the two approaches. So the use cases you can usually do on your data warehouse and data lake, you can extend with Timbr. The use cases that you usually do with a knowledge graph and a graph database, you can also do with Timbr, and we bring the best of the two worlds in a single solution. So to answer what is the alternatives, I think the alternatives are the mainstream current way of doing data integration, which is essentially ETL, copying the data to a single location, writing very complex joins either in views or doing that on the BI tool or even on the Python notebook for a data scientist. And essentially, any solution that can provide a semantic layer, we're an alternative for that. And I'll explain one of the things that is unique about our approach is that Timbr is not a closed platform. Because we are fully compliant with SQL, it's the same interface you would connect to your own database. So you're not limited by the user interface. You're not limited by anything. You can work with Timbr like you work with your own databases, but you get the semantic layer in SQL. That's the main difference. A lot of semantic layers are not even available in SQL, but even if they do available in SQL, they're missing some of the core capabilities that we offer, like data virtualization, like the knowledge graph capabilities, to be able to do graph traversals and understand relationships. So that's a tricky question to ask because we actually bring the best of those two worlds together.
So in a sense, you replace multiple solutions in multiple areas, one on the data virtualization, one on the semantic side, one on the knowledge side. So you can be seen as a hybrid solution on all these three dimensions, and you could be competing with any of these three types of tools is what you're trying to say. Would that be partly accurate, fully accurate? Just wanted to get your...
Fully accurate for some use cases. For some use cases, we can live together with them. If someone already adopted some kind of let's say data virtualization technology, you can simply apply Timbr on top of it. And this is what it means to be part of the. So the answer is part of the SQL ecosystems means that we can all integrate with almost any database and any BI tool in the market. So we don't say you need to replace your BI tool, you need to replace your databases or your data infrastructure. You can just connect Timbr, and you might be able to replace some of it if you want to, right? We as a data modeling platform, we provide you the best knowledge graph data modeling capabilities in our solution, which extends a lot of other solutions. In some cases, makes them redundant. We have customers that actually, evaluated Timbr with other tools, and in some cases they decided to replace them. In some cases they decided I want the synergy. I want to get that benefit from that tool and the benefit from the Timbr tool and just connect them together. And if we were looking at other knowledge graph solutions, if we have created our own query language or our own database, those type of synergies won't be possible because it's not the same interface. You cannot connect a BI tool to a graph database because it doesn't operate in SQL, for example. So it gives you a lot of flexibility in your architecture. I don't think we're limit in an organization. We say, look, this is how it should be. We fit very nicely on what you have, and we might even replace some of the things. But eventually we play nice with others. We don't come and say, look, you need to replace that or that. We
And
extend and give you additional value that you don't have today.
and the design element of continuity kind of helps you with that part of it. So that's actually a very, very interesting aspect. If there's no other question on from the rest of the, okay, there is a question that says, what are the best resources to expand technical skills in the area and continue growing with this particular space?
So
From Amy.
I think that the knowledge graph community has grown a lot in the last couple of years, from conferences, from materials online, and expanding the technical skills is, from my point of view, have two ways you can go. One is the more academic approach, where you can learn where those ideas originated from and how useful they could be, or you can go and look at the industry and what the industry have implemented. And I think some of the things we in our solution we provide is that you don't need a lot of technical skills to create a knowledge graph. Like if you want a very simple start, we'll be happy to provide like a tutorial environment where you can build your own knowledge graph, either using our SQL statements or the user interface that I mentioned. And then you get familiar with the concept. Although you don't go into the technical aspect of how it works behind the scene, you get the idea of how you work with it and how you get value from it. And I think those are the main aspects that you want when you adopt the technology into your organization.
So I had a very, I don't know if it's an intriguing question. It keeps intriguing me all the time. Is you talked about one thing, like whenever we have the structured database, like each field has to become a column in the database, the old way of thinking. And then there is this new wave of thinking that comes up with NoSQL database, like it's less structured, or some of us who are in the process of thinking through some continuity think of semi-structured database, like you do have some columns, but then the rest of the amorphous part of it goes into a blob or a JSON object or something like that, and we try to like save that. So from Timbr.ai's point of view, how do you address something like you already talked about how you address a structured database. How would you work with NoSQL or something that would be a semi-structured database? Like one of the columns would be JSON, which has multiple things inside it. So how do you work with it today, or is it something which you're working on in the future? Just your thoughts on that.
So actually, we already supported that from the initial release of Timbr. So one of the core ideas that we had is say, look, we need to separate the storage layer from the actual knowledge graph layer, from the ontology layer. And what that means is that I can take one table, could be a table in the database, could be a JSON with a lot of hierarchies in it, and map it to multiple business entities. Or if I want, I can even map 5 tables, or even one table and one JSON file to the same business entity called customer. So that abstraction layer does not limit you by saying, look, you can only work with this type of, we don't have the need to have the data in a specific structure. You can map your own structure to the semantic model. The semantic model is actually how I want to expose the data to my data consumers. So if I have a very large JSON that, it's very flexible to work with JSON. I can, the schema is dynamic. It's very simple for developers to work with it. Now you can expose that however you want from a business point of view, regardless of how the developer decided that would be stored in a JSON object. It could be, one JSON to 20 different business entities, like customer, address, favorite brand. Could be a lot of things related to the customer in that JSON. And once you map it to a business model, it facilitates you, because if I would give you access to the actual JSON, you would look at that hierarchy and say, wow, now we need to figure out how do I extract that structure of a customer that I'm looking for from that JSON. And that's the hard part. That's the complexity that we've discussed here. How can I remove that complexity of how the data is stored, whether it's NoSQL, JSON, SQL, from the user who just wants, I want customer information. I want the address, I want the name, I want the favorite brand. I don't care if it's in a JSON structure or in a table structure. I don't care. I want that data simple and intuitive way.
That's actually fantastic to many of our hackers who are listening to this, in terms of saying we have various ways in which data is organized today. And if I learn a tool like Timber, then I basically can handle structured, semi-structured, and completely unstructured as well. So that's something very really nice to hear. So Alok, any other closing thoughts or anything? We have like maybe 4 minutes. So would you want to summarize the discussion, add any
I
closing thoughts to this?
I actually have a question before we summarize. Uh, Earlier, when we were speaking about use cases, one use case you spoke about it was AML and KYC in the traditional finance world. Are you also enabling any use cases in the blockchain world where distributed ledger technology is being used and the transaction is kind of spread across nodes?
So we haven't had yet a customer with that use case, but I believe that the graph structure, the complex relationships that are actually embedded in the distributed model, that's something that we see other knowledge graph solutions that they have those kinds of use cases. So we're sure that we can bring value to those use cases, but that's not our main, enterprise standard custom use case today. So we, as I said, we work with those large enterprise customers who wants to do that, either customer 360, fund 360, and integrate and harmonize their data into a single layer. If those type of use cases, we'll be happy to, if there's a customer or any use cases that we can help with, we'll definitely be happy to explore that as well.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, to summarize in my words, I mean, there is a big business problem out there. The data is exploding, as we know, and we will be in 3 to 5 years, the data will kind of double or triple, and I may actually be wrong. It might be more. So really, for businesses, it is a big problem to deal with this humongous data set. I think graph technology definitely solves for the navigation for the data scientist community. I think at the other spectrum, the customers are looking for more and more personalization, and to make that happen, you need to know exactly the slice of data that serves that purpose in terms of products or services. I think graph plays a role there too. So really, very curious and connected with how this sector is evolving basically.
So that's all we had for this discussion. It was really enriching on a Sunday morning. I think it was equally valuable to all the listeners as well. And I learned a lot from this conversation. So thanks a lot, Amit, and thanks a lot, Alok, for adding all the valuable perspectives there. Back to you, Rashmi.
Awesome. Seriously, thank you all so much for your time, insight, and wisdom this morning for all things data management and Timbr.ai's versatile solutions. So it was definitely refreshing to hear that you don't need deep technical skills to get started. So get to know more about Knowledge Graph and listen back to this conversation to get you started in the space. So we will upload the recorded session to our YouTube channel. And with that, that concludes the workshops and panels for the Inclusive Data Hackathon this weekend. So we're finally made it. Just a last few reminders for all the hackers. So your submissions are due on DevPost by 11:30 a.m. EST. And make sure you are registered for a live presentation to a panel of judges, because a final presentation is the only way to make sure you're eligible for the prize packages. But please note that even if you haven't come as far as you've expected on your project, considering you were only working on it for 3 days, we recommend that you still go through the experience of presenting, because sometimes a strong presentation is enough to win because you have the idea, you fleshed it out, but you might not have gotten it fully concretely working. So still go through the experience. You've come this far, so what's another 10, 12 minutes of presenting? So reach out to a digital page admin member if you need a slot. And once all the presentations and judging are complete, we will kick off the closing ceremony. So the ceremony schedule is subject to change, so please keep an eye out on Discord for updates. with that, thanks for joining.